Okay, I'm gonna make a second video for the day because it is something I've explained a lot of times, and it sometimes seems to help people. I'm hesitant to give my cues on the YouTube because it's not just people I coach, and cues are often specific to the lifter, right? So what I cue for someone probably wouldn't be what I would cue for you. But that being said, a lot of cues all do the same thing. It's just repeating different phrasings of the same thing until you find something that clicks and makes sense for you. So I feel maybe putting my explanations for things out there could be beneficial if it does click for some people. I just don't really feel like getting into arguments where people will say, oh, this cue will lead to this problem, it's a bad cue. That's very case by case basis. I really don't feel like arguing that, but I'm also an argumentative person, so I can't really help myself. So I usually just avoid it. But in this case, I just kind of wanted to break down leg drive in the bench and how to think about it for some people. If you think about it differently and it works for you, by all means, I'm not telling you you're wrong, just the way I think about it. A lot of people ask me about leg drive in the bench and benching because it's my best lift, which I think is a little silly because it probably means it's the one that comes the most naturally to me and I've put the least thought into it, which is probably true. Or my deadlift, but I put a lot more thought into squatting because it's a more difficult lift for me, and I've achieved a reasonable result on it thus far. But that being said, I have put a lot of thought into bench because so many people hire me to help their bench that I certainly have tried to become good at it. And breaking down leg drive, the first thing I like to think about is when you're setting up, I always advise having minimal weight on your butt on the bench. I think about doing a back bridge where half the weight is up on my traps, not on my like mid back and lower back. I try to get up onto my traps. I find that's conducive to getting your arch from your T-spine rather than arching from your lower back, which is the foundation of a good arch. And at some point I'll make a video. It's been done a million times, but I will do it as well. A good arch comes from the T-spine because for two reasons. One is that's what reduces the ROM. Having your belly really high doesn't cut your ROM at all, and it makes you in a bad position to transfer leg drive to the bar, as well as the having the thoracic spine arch makes the press at a slightly more declined angle, which puts you in a better position to utilize stronger muscles, right? So an overhead press is the weakest, incline's a little stronger, a flat is a little stronger, and if you do some weight, dips are usually the strongest and the most load people can move. The more downward presses are in a more effective position to use stronger, larger muscles. So you want to have some degree of arch, whether you want to reduce your ROM or not, just to make it that more downward decline bench. And so I find getting up on my traps and splitting the weight between in my feet and on my traps, almost as if I'm doing a back bridge, right? I try to think about having as much weight up on my traps as I can. I'm just driving my feet to slide me back off the bench, right? And I also advise flexing your glutes. I think it's a mistake to think that leg drive comes from the glutes. And I think where this comes from is someone will be driving with their legs and it's not transferring into the bar very well because it's transferring through untensed hips, right? So you say flex your glutes, those tense up, and that leg drive from your quads transfers through your hips better because it's more solid. And you assume that you're flexing your glutes was what transferred the bar. But if you think about what someone who benches with a heave, you're trying to use force from your legs to drive the bar back towards your spotters, right? And that's your glutes are going to go up, just line of force. That's not how that's going to work. That backwards force must come from your quads, right? But flexing your butt usually will make your back feel a little better and will help you prevent arching from your lower back, right? So I'll flex my butt, I'll get up on my traps, and I will be driving myself back towards my spotter, and I'm using the weight in the bar and pushing my hands into it to stop me from sliding. That pressure from your pushing your hands into the bar and pushing your back down into the mat is what's going to prevent you from sliding. You shouldn't need some elaborate setup to stop you from sliding. You should be able to use the weight in the bar to prevent that sliding by increasing the friction between there, by increasing the downward force, right? And from there, you unrack, blah, blah, blah. You're always thinking scaps back and scaps down. And then there's two kinds of, oh my God, there's two kinds of benchers in this case, right? You have a soft touch bencher, which you are going to have a constant leg drive. You are going to be driving up onto the traps an equal amount the whole rep, right? And then you're going to have a heave bencher. The soft touch, it's relatively simple. All you're doing is driving your legs up onto your traps to maintain your thoracic position, and you're largely reversing the weight with your pecs and triceps, right? Generally speaking, that's going to be associated with larger arch and maybe a wider grip, but not always. And then you have a heave to a varying degree, which is how I bench, right? And the way I might conceptualize that is I'm driving with my legs really hard, but maybe not as hard as I can. That's one way to think about it. And the bar will sink into my chest. I will pause, and then when I think press, I go to 100% leg drive, and that is going to force the bar back. Another way to think about this is you have, let's say you're trying to get all of your weight onto your traps. You bring the bar down, the bar comes into contact with your chest, which, that point of contact is what the force is going to be transferred through, right? And you're going to load some of that weight that is sinking into your chest into your feet. You are going to pause, and then you're going to transfer that additional load you moved to your feet back up onto your traps, and that is going to be the backwards motion that is going to carry into the bar and help you kick the bar back towards your spotter and get the bar back above your shoulders in a position that you will be able to finish the lift. And then within this, if you are someone who benches with a heave, that is one way I might recommend thinking about it. Within that, timing becomes paramount, right? A lot of people will initiate that drive when the bar first comes into contact with their chest, leaving them kind of like without power, without that pop off their chest. This can get really bad if you train with a dubious pause, like I do. You'll associate the bar touching your chest with initiating the leg drive. But then when you go to pause, you'll find it goes very poorly because you'll initiate your leg drive when that bar first comes into contact. Maybe it doesn't, you'll initiate it when it hits the lowest point, but what you want to do is you want to initiate the leg drive when you would get a press command, right? If you're just training, it's still the same concept. Once you have decided that the pause is done, you're going to transfer that force you put into your feet back towards the spotter. And I find that if you bench like this, one of the best things you can do is to work 3 count pauses into your warm-ups. This will make it horribly obvious if you're driving your legs early, because they're going to feel like death. And it's a very quick way, and it's an honesty check. I like doing drills within the warm-ups, so like I'll often do a 3 count negative squat to double check my positions, because you'll speed through them, and you might not realize you're in an unsustainable position when you're squatting fast with light weights, but when you squat slow and you're in an unsustainable position, it becomes horribly obvious. Much the same, if on your bench you do a 3 count pause, it'll be really obvious if you're firing your leg drive early, and you'll be able to fairly easily correct that to initiating that leg drive once the duration of the pause is done. And I find that this skill that you can practice on a warm-up will carry over when you switch back to a regular 1 count pause or a comp pause or really even just a shit pause that doesn't exist. It's just a good way to associate in your mind when in the press that transfer of force begins back.